Good evening. After a marathon meeting lasting 3 days, the full Hawke ministry today finally completed the government's controversial tax reform package. Treasurer Keating is expected to announce the details on Wednesday. It's understood to include a capital gains tax with no death duty element, the introduction of ID cards without a photograph, and tax cuts for higher income earners. Mr Keating told Parliament today the package represents the most important tax reform in Australian history. Prime Minister Hawke, meanwhile, is due back in Canberra early tomorrow after a brief visit to Papua New Guinea. Mr Hawke, along with opposition leaders past and present, have been helping the country celebrate its 10th anniversary of independence. After attending a series of dedication ceremonies, Mr Hawke held a private meeting with his Papua New Guinean counterpart, Michael Somare. The two leaders settled the country's new aid program, which will cost Australia $1.5 billion over the next 5 years. Then Mr Somare signed Mr Hawke's South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone Treaty. That led Mr Hawke later heaping contempt on French President Mitterrand's invitation for Pacific leaders to visit his nuclear test site at Mururoa Atoll.
I will not. I have one message and one message alone for President Mitterrand, and that's the one I delivered recently. If President Mitterrand is so interested to prove to everyone in our region just how absolutely safe these tests are, there is one logical conclusion that follows. Take his tests back to France and have those absolutely safe tests in metropolitan France.
Striking psychiatric nurses have returned to work, but it may be only temporary. At an angry meeting in Sydney today, nurses voted to give the state government 48 hours to come back to the negotiating table or face another round of industrial action. Tonight, Acting Health Minister Kevin Stewart ruled out any further negotiations with the Nurses Association until Mr Mulock returns to work on Monday after 2 weeks sick leave. Contracts for the first private development project at Darling Harbour were exchanged today, and it's hoped the $50 million festival markets will be ready for the bicentenary in 1988. Exchanging contracts was a public event between New South Wales Premier Neville Wran and the developers, a partnership of Custom Credit, Hastings Property and an American company headed by architect James Roos. The $50 million deal will see a 3-storey marketplace, shops and restaurant.
The site for the retail markets is this location here, a prime spot in the Darling Harbour development.
And today's business deal is expected to be the first of many.
We, of course, expect that there will be other private sector investment and development as time goes on in Darling Harbour, not the least of which will be an international hotel.
The state government anticipates that private investment in the Darling Harbour project will exceed $1 billion over the next 5 to 7 years. It probably had to happen. One of the great traditions of Italy is under threat. The long lunch, followed possibly by a nap, is being replaced by the eat and run lunch.
Italy has been one of the last holdouts in Europe, but American-style fast food has finally arrived. Italians are bunching up. They don't stand in lines to place their orders for hamburgers and French fries. The new eateries are seen as a sign that Italian taste and tradition are changing. But not everyone welcomes this trend. In fact, it's giving some Italians an upset stomach. This restaurant owner calls it a case of gastronomical neocolonialism and declares that fast food cannot be adapted to Italian tradition. But the manager of a fast food restaurant says there can be a compromise.
The people is not obliged to eat every day fast food.
After all, most of Italy still enjoys a 3-hour lunch.
In tonight's $1 million lotto draw, the winning numbers are 39, 2, 1, 10, 34, 20. The supplementary number 7. And finally, the forecast for tomorrow, mostly a dry day with light to moderate northwest winds, freshening in the afternoon. Sea slight to choppy with the change. Temperature range, the city 13 to 21, Liverpool 10 to 22. And that's Nightline for this Monday. I'm Elizabeth Hayes. Good night.